Well, I'm going to hand it over to Coeleen Kiebert,
All right.
local artist, and I'll just let you take it away. If you need anything at all, let us know.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Sean has been a mold maker for me and a bronze caster for me. I came to UC Santa Cruz in 1971 when we just had 5 campuses, and they promised there wouldn't be any more. But it keeps growing and growing, and because it's such a good place. I'm so glad I came, and I'm so glad I stayed. I came from the University of Minnesota in grad school. There I was studying ed psych, but I wasn't getting what I wanted, and I found my way here, and that I will explain in the slides. This is an image of me in my home. This is the home that I moved into when I moved here, an old Spanish house that they couldn't get rid of, and I'm very lucky that that's where we still are. I turned the living room into a gallery, so I'm walking through living with my work all the time. And I highly recommend that you have your work in a place where you're seeing it all the time. When you're just walking by it, you get another sense of something that's not quite right yet, or something that's better than you thought. You want to do more of that. So living with your work is a big part of it. This is the polar bear. I'll talk about that. I think that one of the things that happens is that you might find you have an icon, a talisman, a buddy. You might have even brought one to school when you came here that keeps showing up in your work. So sometimes something will happen in the world, and I'll ask my polar bear, what do you think about that? And it inspires me to take that on in sculpture. This is a ceramic porcelain about 36 inches high. I like to embed oxides in the clay itself, rutile, red iron oxide, and I've fired 3 or 4 times, and then the final firing of gold luster. With this, I like to build in with slabs, smaller pieces of slab that I put together. In this case, I'm more likely to work with big chunks of clay that I put together and see what's going to happen as a result of doing that. And I have written a book, Art and Spirit, which is about the way I teach. My first teacher was Warren McKenzie at the University of Minnesota in 1954. He was a tough taskmaster, but he taught, and he taught well. You know, we stand on the shoulders of the people before us, and because he was such a taskmaster, I think that I'm pretty good at dealing with the technical demands of working with clay and firing. So I have Warren's voice in my mind often. This article is called Warren McKenzie and the Straight Pot. This is a typical Warren McKenzie piece. I'm emphasizing that in the straight pot because that's probably where Warren and I parted company. He was very, as I said, severe and straight about what it was that he was doing. So to my dismay, I got my first 5 credit C from Warren, and I did not understand why. And I wanted to argue the grade. I went to him. He refused to change it. To this day, I do not know why. There might have been just a little too much going on in that pot, or maybe some chauvinism in '54. But Warren also had a love of Japanese ware, and that was something I couldn't understand in the '50s. We had not yet been exposed to Japanese ceramics. So this is Warren in his studio. And so you see the craftsmanship is just terrific. Warren likes to sit at this, up on this higher level in his studio when he's working. And he has a room next to this room when you go in where his pots sit on a table. There might be 50, 60 pots. He just has another pot there with money in it. And he works on the honor system. So you buy the pot, you might not see Warren at all. He just didn't want to be bothered, taken away from the wheel or his work to deal with the customers, nor did he want to be bothered with some lady in a fur coat that comes up with 2 pots and can say, can I have these for the price of one? So he became a famous potter, even though he didn't do the PR thing in his shop. Now, his interest in Japanese art brought Shoji Hamada to Minnesota while I was there. This is really a great thing. This is Hamada, and this is Bernard Leach. Now, Warren went through the same kind of misery when I did poorly with him. He wanted to study with Bernard Leach. Leach studied with Hamada in Japan, but he settled in the south of England. And Warren went to Leach and said, I want to study with you. And here is my work. And Leach said, forget it. But he said, you can stay and help me stack the kiln tonight, wood-stoked kiln. So they sat up all night with Leach, stacking the kiln, and they ended up staying 2 years. And Warren said that Leach made him throw 600 pots before he could save one. Here's a little bit more of Shoji Hamada. He is no longer with us, of course, but he's amongst the Mashiko potters that are north of Tokyo. If any of you go to Japan, a wonderful way to visit Japan is to go to the 5 kilns that are in Japan in different locations. And Mashiko is this round ware that Hamada worked with, and there's a lot of education going on up there in Mashiko. A little story about Bernard. He had the feeling that there's an aesthetic sense within us, and we know the difference between a good pot and a bad pot. And he decided to test that premise. And so one day he had 5 pots that he lined up. They were all the same. You could hardly tell the difference between them. But he thought one might be better than the rest. And so he called his workmen in one at a time. And these were guys that did not throw pots. These were people that were firing the kiln and doing the clay and the glazes. And one at a time asked them which pot they thought was the best, and they all chose the same pot. He said, what is that in us, that little thing that we know something isn't quite there, but why do we know that? What is it in us? So I went to Japan. This pot is called Winter Rabbit. It's a raku pot, and this piece is from the 17th century. Imagine how far ahead this is in terms of abstract art. 17th century. You would think it was done today. For the Japanese potter, White Rabbit is like the Mona Lisa is for us. This piece in the middle is 16th century. So this kind of ware at that time is very abstract, far more abstract than our ceramics were at the time that I started studying. And because it is this way, they call it wabi-sabi, you might have heard that, the lip has this expression to it, just the lumpiness of the piece, the roughness of the piece. This is a political statement. The artists were making political statements by going to this level with their art, being abstract. This was their voice against the oppressive government. So it's something to keep in tune with when you're doing your own work. This little stone here with the rope around it is on the path to the tea house. And that stone means, do not go this way. We Westerners would put up a sign, do not enter, no trespassing, stop. But when you go and you see this, you know. You don't have to be told why that stone is there because your body knows, your unconscious knows. So then, I was still at the University of Minnesota. The human potential movement hit. That was the late 60s. And I heard about Abraham Maslow. And as a graduate student, I started studying Maslow and wanting to build that into my graduate work. I'm just going to go through Maslow's hierarchy of needs because you're all experiencing them. We all are. He's talking about being self-actualized and having peak experiences when you're doing your artwork. But how does that happen? What does a human being have to do? And Maslow says the first thing is you have to find out where you're going to do it. That you establish your territory. You come here to Santa Cruz, you find out where am I going to stay? Where am I going to dump my stuff where it'll be there? Where am I going to sit in class when I come in? Where am I going to work? Which pedestal is mine? Which space on the table is mine? It's all territorial stuff that has to be established before the creative juices are comfortable enough to come forth. Then the second level is to secure that. How do I secure that? How am I going to be able to stay here? Well, how am I going to be able to stay in this class? Well, you're going to have to do some certain projects. Maybe you're going to have to get a job at a restaurant downtown in order to be able to afford staying here. That's how you're going to secure it. Or maybe your folks are helping you out. Or maybe you're lucky to have a grant. That second stage is a second stage where you secure it. And then when that's taken care of, you can look around and say, who else is here? Who else is here? Who else is thinking like I do? Who become your friends? Who are the people that you hang out with? And you find a sense of self. You begin to say, oh, this is who I am. This is what I'm about. And that leads to other people seeing what you're about also. You become identified as a sculpture student who's particularly interested in public works. All of this begins to develop the self-esteem of self-actualization. And I began to have I'd say more sophisticated understanding of what was going on by accessing the unconscious, and that this is where all art comes from. Especially now, this is where art is coming from. And so accessing that unconscious, up to that point it was Freud, and people were very afraid of the unconscious, that is to be repressed or at least quieted down with drugs or worse yet, other techniques of quieting it. We have a long, long ways to go in terms of integrating our unconscious into our lives and into our art. But that's what Jung was talking about. And so I was visiting a friend out here, a Gestalt art therapist, and one day she said, there's a gentleman up on campus at UCSC who I'm going to have lunch with tomorrow. Why don't you come on along? It could be interesting. So I came, and we sat out on the plaza at College, which is still very much the same. And the gentleman was Frank Barron. And I discovered that Frank was doing elegant work in the study of the creative process and creative personality. And I knew then, this is it. So I packed up my bags and my 4 kids, and we came to Santa Cruz. And that was in 1971. And so I've written about this. That is in my book. You're welcome to look through here. And over the years of teaching, I started teaching in 1972 here right away. I'll take a subject and make a collage about it. So some of the pieces that are here are an example of what happened when Hillary Clinton was not elected. I was horrified. My politics are such that I was hoping she would be elected. And I thought, what am I going to do? I've got to do something about this. I just can't just sit here in my studio. I've got to do something about this. Actually, the first piece was, I must do something about this. This could be passed around. Sean did the casting of this particular piece. I didn't notice at the time that I made it at first that there's a snake around the bottom of the chair. But it was the beginning of maybe the apple, and that maybe this is a time for us to bite into the apple and raise our consciousness as Eve did in the story. So that became a thread, as I mentioned before. You know, sometimes there's a thread. That became my thread. And actually the piece that is being passed around after I understood that has an apple that goes with it now. A lot of the pieces are around that subject, and the apple takes the cover of my book too. So that's an example of knowing what I want to talk about. I want to talk about what happened in the election, that election. So this is what I found out about the process of creating. That this first thing that Maslow talks about is knowing what you're going to do, where you're going to do it. I am going to. And you must have heard yourself say that 100 times. I'm going to go down to the store. I'm going to take a class. I'm going to. It's that first statement that we make that gets us on the path. So Sean is asking you to come up with an artist to study. I'm going to study da-da-da. That's exactly the way to go into the process. What are you going to find out about this person that you're going to study? You begin to gather information about that person. You go to the library. If you're lucky, you go to an exhibition and see it. You go up to San Francisco. Track them down. You're gathering. What was this person about? What did they want to talk about? What was in their mind? What were they trying to say? And then you get into intimation. Connect the dots. What was going on with that person? The inspiration and how things come about. And then when we do that, when the dots begin to connect, it's like, I get it now. And that's like the peak experience that happens. Well, I understand now. Or you may be fishing around for artists right now. And so maybe you look at 3 or 4 or 5, many artists, and then you begin to find the one that, this is the one. You connect the dots. This is the one I want to study. And then what do I want to know about him and her? And the paper unfolds or the images unfold, and that's the illumination. It's an altered state. We can put things on your head and measure you and know that you are in an altered state when this is happening. And it can be, we have a spiritual teacher here who somebody asked him, is the altered state that I get into when I'm creating or meditating the same as the one that I get into when I'm on a drug trip? Baba Haridas said, yes, it's the same. It's just that one is achieved with a sledgehammer. So that's skipping these first steps and not doing your homework to get to illumination. Now, one of the, many of us, I did, wait for these peak experiences to happen. You sit there and wait for them to happen. And nothing's happening. Maslow said, if you want more of this in your life, you have to arrange your life so that it can happen. You don't just sit and wait for it. Part of arranging your life so this can happen is the discipline of knowing that you're in the process. You're already in this process when you signed up for the class and came in. So these are 3 more parts of the process that we don't pay attention to. The first one is reflection. What happened? You do a work of art, and then do you spend time with it, looking at it? What happened? What's coming up here for me? What might I want to just change a little bit? I might go in there and tweak this or that, but you're reflecting on it, taking the time to look at what you did. And then when that happens, the next stage is you're going to want to show it to somebody. You're going to want to say, look, see what happened. As a little kid, you bring the drawing home and say, hey, Mom, look what I did. It's just built into us to want to share. It completes the process. But in this, and I call it validation, validation is like one woman shows or a book signing. You go and you validate. We act on validating others, and others need the validation. Because especially at a book signing, you'll hear somebody ask the author, so what are you going to do next? And they'll say, well, I was thinking of, and that's the process fuels itself. There'll be next time I think of, what are you working on now, Sean? Or I asked Daniel Rose, ran into him on the street downtown, what are you working on now? And Daniel says, oh, just trying to get out of the way of the clay. Let it speak now, moving into another stage of working. So this is what I mean by the stages of the creative process. And these first three first four, I should say, are pretty familiar. When I would share them with the scientists, they would say, oh yeah, we know about this. This is a scientific method. It's very dry when you look at it that way. When you look at it in terms of how you can refuel it, how you go into this in terms of completing your work that you do here, then it gets juicy. Then it begins to move for you. Any questions about this? Because it's kind of something else. Okay, well, let's go on then. So I went to Japan. Doing the human potential thing, the next question that comes up is, how is this spiritual? What has this got to do with my spiritual life? And I heard about these people in Japan who are all artists. The Emoto people believe that the highest state the human being is in is when they are creating. And they feel obliged to create. And so they do their weekends, they go out to their compound and they do calligraphy, tea ceremony, aikido. We, with our Western eye, are inclined to say, well, I don't get it, or I don't understand, or I like it, or I don't like it. We usually will make a judgment about it. But their point is to understand what was the experience the artist was having while they were doing this. And you follow the stroke that way. And I recall somebody saying that's going to take a long time when you have a calligraphy all. I heard the artist say, yes, it took me a long time. It's going to take you a long time to look at it. Then I went to China, and I learned a lot about sculpture in China. These are their China rocks. They are considered the highest form of art in China. They are these huge, massive rocks that are put in Lake Tai. And Lake Tai is a huge lake, 7 rivers running through it. And the rocks stay in the river for 100 years. And the flow of the rivers washes out different oxides and minerals at different rates. So at the end of 100 years, so they're doing this for their families. They have these big pens of rocks, and the rocks are waiting. And so in 100 years, they're brought out and placed in gardens like this. And when we asked to see the Kuan Yins and the Buddhas sculptures, they kind of said, well, it's all right if you want to, but you really have to see the China rocks to see the Chinese. The other thing about the Chinese is that this is a picture of me. That's my hat. I am trying to draw what's over there, but they stand right in front of you because they figure you've already seen it. So you wouldn't sit there and draw the mountain in front of you. You go to the mountain, you camp out, you play the flute, you write a little poetry, you go back to your studio, and when you feel yourself to be in the right place, you do the memory of it. And this is an example of the sketchbooks that I have out here. This is a China rock that's down in Pasadena right now. In the garden at the Huntington Library, we'll see what that rock looks like after what it's going through. And that's what we want. Daniel Rhodes used to say, show me a piece that has had an experience. And we're going to see a lot of that after Los Angeles. I wanted to have my own China rocks, but they're very expensive, so I make my own. So these are 2 examples of ceramic China rocks. They're about 36 inches, 38 inches high. And it's the memory of waves hitting each other when they come up on the shore. And this is the memory of the garden that I was sitting in the slide right before, the yellow summer palace. Only the royal are able to have yellow, and somehow it being in the summer palace. Up in Golden Gate Park, there's a beautiful, beautiful, big, really big rock from Lake Tai in the Japanese garden. And this is my memory of Huanshan Mountain. There I have been now a couple times.